Imagine landing from a long flight, rushing to your daughter's home, only to find her collapsed on the floor, fighting for her life, while her husband laughs on a yacht with his mistress thousands of miles away. What would you do if betrayal came when your family needed loyalty the most? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the unstoppable strength of a mother who turned grief into precision and silence into justice. If you've ever wondered how karma feels when it's hand-delivered, stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this story with someone who believes in poetic justice. The sliding doors of the terminal parted with their usual mechanical sigh, but to me, the sound felt heavier that night. My flight had been long, but exhaustion wasn't what made my steps urgent. Something inside me, call it a mother's instinct, a tug of the heart, a whisper I couldn't ignore, told me not to stop at home, not to rest, not even to call ahead. Instead, I pulled my suitcase straight into a waiting cab, gave the driver my daughter's address, and sat in silence as the city lights blurred past. The cabbie tried to make small talk, commenting on the weather, the late hour, and how traffic was unusually light. I nodded, but my gaze stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. There was a weight pressing against my chest, a kind of silence that hummed beneath my ribs, warning me something wasn't right. Mothers know. We always know. When the car pulled up to her house, everything looked ordinary. The porch light glowed, the blinds were drawn, a wreath still hung on the door from last month's baby shower. The pastel ribbons faded from sun and wind. But behind that ordinary facade, a heaviness lingered. And as soon as I stepped out of the cab, I felt it cling to me like a second skin. I didn't knock. I didn't call her name. I simply turned the handle and walked in. The silence inside was wrong. Not the peaceful silence of a home at rest, but the suffocating kind. Thick, unnatural, filled with absence. The air smelled faintly of lavender detergent and something else, sharp and metallic. My pulse quickened. I dropped my suitcase by the door and moved deeper into the house, every step louder than it should have been. And then I saw her. My daughter lay crumbled on the living room floor, pale as porcelain, her dress twisted around her swollen belly. Her breath came in shallow gasps, uneven, each one a battle. Her hand clutched at her stomach as if she were trying to shield the life inside. For a heartbeat, the world tilted. My knees almost gave out beneath me. "Sweetheart!" My voice cracked as I rushed forward, kneeling beside her. Her skin was clammy, her lips tinged gray. Her eyelids fluttered weakly at the sound of my voice, but she couldn't form words. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. She needed calm. She needed me steady. My hands shook as I dialed for an ambulance, the sound of the operator's voice grounding me. I gave the address, the details, everything in clipped, controlled words, though inside I was screaming. The minutes stretched like hours until the wail of sirens cut through the silence. When the paramedics arrived, everything blurred into motion. Their voices were urgent but professional, calling out numbers, attaching monitors, lifting her onto a stretcher. I followed close behind, numb but steady, my hand gripping hers as tightly as I could. Her pulse throbbed faintly beneath my fingers. "I'm here," I whispered, though I didn't know if she could hear me. The ambulance lights painted the night in frantic red and white. I climbed inside, refusing to let go, watching helplessly as they worked. Oxygen mask, IV lines, a blood pressure cuff that made their expressions tighten. My daughter, my only child, was fighting for her life, and all I could do was cling to her hand and pray. At the hospital, the sliding doors swallowed her stretcher as nurses and doctors swarmed. They spoke in acronyms and urgent commands, words I could barely process. ICU, stabilize, monitoring fetal distress. I tried to follow, but a nurse guided me gently back. We'll take care of her. Please wait here. Wait. The cruelest command in the world. I sat in the hard plastic chair, my fists pressed to my knees, staring at the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. The clock on the wall ticked too loud, every second scraping against my nerves. Memories began to flood me unbidden. Her first steps, her laugh as a toddler, the day she told me she was pregnant, her eyes shining with hope. This was supposed to be a season of joy, not fear. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning. Finally, they let me see her. The ICU was a forest of machines, their beeps and hums keeping rhythm with her fragile breaths. Tubes snaked across her body, monitors blinked, and for a moment I felt I had stepped into some surreal nightmare. But there she was. Alive. Broken, but alive. I moved to her bedside and took her hand. Her fingers were cool against mine, and I gripped them like an anchor. "You're safe," I whispered, though the words were as much for me as for her. I pressed my forehead to our joined hands, fighting the tears that burned my eyes. I couldn't fall apart, not now. She needed strength, not sorrow. I stayed that way for what felt like forever, just holding her, breathing with her, willing her to fight. And in that silence, the real silence, not the suffocating one from the house, I made a promise. Whatever had brought her here, whatever betrayal or abandonment had left her to face this alone, I would uncover it. I would carry her through. But in the deepest part of me, a cold truth was already settling. This wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just fate. Something darker lingered behind the scenes, and I was going to find it. The hospital had a way of swallowing time. Minutes blurred into hours, and hours felt like days. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, the machines never stopped their beeping, and the smell of antiseptic clung to everything. I sat by my daughter's bed, her hand in mine, staring at her pale face. The rise and fall of her chest was shallow but steady, each breath mechanical, coaxed from her by the machines that surrounded us. I should have been exhausted. I'd flown halfway across the country, rushed straight from the airport, and now sat hunched in a stiff-backed chair. But I couldn't feel fatigue. My mind was sharp, restless, haunted by the image of her crumpled on the floor. She had looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the vibrant woman who once lit up rooms with her laughter. I stroked the back of her hand with my thumb. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," I whispered. My voice cracked. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but I needed her to hear it. "I'm right here. I won't leave you." The doctors came and went, their expressions carefully neutral, offering updates in clipped tones. "She's stable for now. The baby's heartbeat is irregular, but holding. We're monitoring closely." They spoke in medical language that felt cold, clinical. They didn't see the girl who had once clutched her favorite blanket when thunderstorms scared her. They didn't see the woman who cried happy tears when she told me I'd be a grandmother. To them, she was a patient. To me, she was my whole world. It was in that sterile quiet that my thoughts began to drift toward him, her husband. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? Why wasn't he here, pacing the halls, demanding answers, holding her hand the way I was? I tried to push the thought aside, but unease gnawed at me. Out of instinct more than logic, I pulled out my phone and opened the location sharing app. My daughter had once added me for safety, back when she was traveling for work. He too had agreed to share his location with her, a gesture that had seemed thoughtful at the time. Maybe he didn't even remember it's still linked. I tapped his name. The screen loaded, little blue dots populating across the map, and then my breath caught in my throat. Not here. Not even close. His trail traced across the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away. I zoomed in, my heart hammering. Hawaii. The location pulsed from a marina, and then when I pressed into the latest update, I saw it. A live photo. Him on the deck of a gleaming yacht, champagne flute in hand. Behind him, the water sparkled. And just over his shoulder, a woman leaned into the frame. Her smile carefree, her hand resting casually on his arm. His mistress. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The hospital sounds faded into a dull roar, my vision narrowing to that tiny screen. My daughter lay in the ICU, wires and tubes tethering her to life, while the man who vowed to protect her toasted champagne under tropical skies. Grief twisted in my chest, sharp and suffocating. My jaw clenched so hard it ached. My grief sharpened, shifted, hardened into something else, something cold, unyielding, rage. Yes, but not the wild, reckless kind. This was different. This was precise. I remembered the first time he walked into my home. He had been all charm and polish, every word carefully chosen. My daughter's eyes had sparkled when she looked at him. She had believed in him, and I had wanted to believe too. Wanted to think that at last she had found someone steady, someone who would build a safe world around her. But the cracks had been there, the subtle shifts, the calls he always stepped outside to take, the trips that grew longer and harder to explain, the way her smile had faded over the months, replaced with a shadowed look as though she carried storms she couldn't name. She had lingered on her belly sometimes, her hand pressed to her unborn child, as if grounding herself against some invisible force. I had noticed. I hadn't asked enough. Now the truth blazed under fluorescent light. While she fought for her life, he celebrated betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. Instead, I sat straighter, my hand still wrapped around hers. In that silence, I made a vow I would carry out with every ounce of precision life had ever taught me. He would pay, not with fists or fury, but with something far colder, with ruin. The machines hummed softly beside me, as if agreeing with my silent oath. I opened another app, scrolling through documents, records, notes, things I had once dismissed as unimportant details. Years ago, cautious and ever-trusting, my daughter had added my name to their joint financial safety nets, just in case. That case had arrived. I began to map out the steps in my mind, each move careful, deliberate. He had built his life on money, status, possessions, illusions of power, and that was exactly where I would dismantle him, brick by brick, account by account, until all he had left was the memory of the empire he thought was untouchable. A nurse adjusted one of the monitors, pulling me from my thoughts. "She's stable," the nurse murmured softly, glancing at me with a kind of practiced compassion. I nodded, squeezing my daughter's hand. Stable for now. But stability was fragile. I leaned closer, whispering again, "You don't need to worry anymore. I've got you. He won't hurt you again." And for the first time since stepping off that plane, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not yet, but purpose. The silence in the ICU wasn't suffocating anymore. It was waiting. It was sharpening. It was the silence before a storm. He arrived in our lives the way a well-rehearsed actor enters a stage. On cue, smiling, lines memorized, lighting perfect. He shook my hand at my daughter's apartment, eyes bright with attention, listening so intensely it felt like warmth. He knew my favorite tea by our second meeting, claimed he loved the same old Motown records I did, and laughed at the exact moments that showed he'd really heard me. It was disarming. His willingness to pay attention, to make the small things feel important. I wanted to be cautious, but I also wanted my daughter to be happy. It's dangerous, the tenderness a parent feels when their child smiles. It makes faith easy and doubt feel cruel. Back then, my daughter radiated a kind of new light. She called me after their third date, breathless, whispering like joy might break if she spoke too loudly. "He's different, Mom," she said. "He makes plans, real ones. He asks about my deadlines and shows up with dinner when I'm working late. He said I shouldn't have to be strong all the time." The last line held me. Shouldn't have to be strong all the time. I remembered her childhood, just the two of us, and how often she felt she had to be brave for me too. If someone wanted to lift that weight for her, wasn't I required to welcome him? He was attentive, the kind of attentive that turns errands into gestures. He filled gas tanks, brought chargers to offices, remembered birthdays of cousins he'd never met. He cultivated the illusion of steadiness the way a gardener trains a vine, guiding, pruning, never letting the growth look wild. Everyone praised him at Thanksgiving. "Keeper," my sister mouthed, while he told a story that cast my daughter as brilliant and him as her cheerleader. My daughter's eyes glittered with gratitude. I wanted to believe more than I wanted to investigate. The first crack was so small, it looked like nothing at all. He took a phone call on the balcony during dessert. He waved it off when he came back. "Work fires," he said, dismissive but charming. "I won't bore you." He pressed another slice of pie into my daughter's hands, as if generosity could substitute for transparency. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The moment filed itself in my memory and then softened, because that's what we do with blemishes on a pretty picture. We blur. They moved in together the following spring. The apartment grew neater in ways that weren't hers. Throw pillows aligned like geometry, no shoes by the door, a leather valet tray for keys and wallet. He drew borders around the domestic world with an elegant, invisible pen. "He likes things tidy," my daughter said, shrugging. "Honestly, it helps me. I think better when it's organized." I nodded. Order isn't a crime. But order can also be control, wearing a silk tie. He proposed by the river under white string lights he claimed he strung himself. A photographer materialized from the trees right on cue. The photos were beautiful, his hands cupping her face, the ring flashing, her laugh crescent bright. I kept one framed on my dresser for months. When I look back now, I see how he always found the camera, even in surprise. Some people can't help angling their lives toward lenses. Wedding planning turned him into a project manager, and my daughter into a client. He negotiated contracts, charmed vendors, insisted on protecting the budget. It sounded pragmatic. Sometimes, though, I caught the way he redirected questions addressed to her. "She's not great with spreadsheets," he laughed once, and my daughter laughed too, but with a tightness around the eyes I recognized. I pulled her aside after the tasting. "Does he steamroll?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "He just cares," she said. "It's nice to be cared for." It is. It is also easy to mistake management for devotion. On the wedding day, he cried at the vows. He held her face as though she were treasure. Even I, old skeptic, felt a softening that bordered on surrender. I told him quietly, when no one was looking, "Her heart is the best thing I've ever known." He didn't miss a beat. He said, "I know it sounded reverent. I will take care of it." The words were a promise shaped like a benediction. I blessed what I thought I'd heard. After the honeymoon, his job got bigger. Late-night calls multiplied. He stepped onto balconies, into elevators, out onto sidewalks for air he suddenly needed only when the phone rang. "Deals don't sleep," he joked. He bought a better suit, then a better watch. My daughter celebrated his promotions with homemade steak and letters tucked into his briefcase. She called me less on weeknights and more on Sunday mornings, voice bright, telling me how they were planning for a house, for a nursery someday, for trips to places with water so blue it felt like a cartoon. Then came the networking trips. 2 days, then 3. "Clients love resort retreats," he said, exasperated at the waste, rolling his eyes to align himself with us, the normal people who disliked extravagance. "It's all schmoozing and sunburns. I'd rather be home." He always said the thing a good man would say, even with his calendar contradicted him. When my daughter told me she was pregnant, she trembling laughed and cried into my sweater. "He's going to be such a good father," she said. "He's reading baby books already." He did read them, aloud, performing, tracing lines on diagrams with a finger like a conductor's baton. He rearranged the apartment to make space for a crib. He made spreadsheets for budgets and childcare wait lists. It was dazzling, if you didn't look too long at the edges. The edges, a text she caught from across the room, her name replaced by, "Hey, I'm in a meeting," before he turned the phone face down. The weekend he returned with the sunburn he explained as golf charity tournament, despite the forecast stubborn cloud cover. The scent of sea salt cologne she didn't buy and he didn't wear to the office. She mentioned them to me not as accusations, but as confessions of unease, then dismissed them herself, laughing gently at her pregnancy brain. He helped her do that. Convert instincts into jokes, label alarms as sensitivity, file discomfort under the heading of gratitude for being loved at all. I noticed how she started touching her belly during disagreements, the way sailors touch wood before storms. It wasn't dramatic, just a palm laid gently, as though she were asking the child inside to be a witness, an ally, a grounding wire. Once when he left the table to take yet another call, she glanced at me with a flicker that didn't last long enough to become a plea. "He is under pressure," she said before I asked. I nodded before I chose. We both participated in the smoothing. He was brilliant at generosity in public. He donated at galas, tipped loudly, made toasts about the women who make us better. He listened to other people's stories like a job, turned empathy into applause. He cultivated a brand, thoughtful husband, emerging executive, future father who carried the stroller box himself. If image is a currency, he was liquid. He knew exactly how to launder admiration into access. And yet, on a Tuesday afternoon, I stopped by with soup and found a post-it on the fridge in his handwriting. Groceries, organic only, no carbs after 6. It wasn't a conversation. It was a policy. My daughter waved it off. He's on a health kick. But I watched her hesitate before she reached for bread. Shouldn't feel like a compliance program. When she added my name years ago to their just-in-case accounts, her voice had been sheepish. You taught me to keep safety nets, she said. It's not about not trusting him, it's just grown up. I told her I was proud of her wisdom. I didn't say that the phrase, just in case, had made a home in my ribcage and paced there like a watchman. The last time I saw him before everything unraveled, he hugged me with a warmth that felt like theater lights. Bright, hot, flattering, and a little too controlled. He asked about my flight for an upcoming trip and insisted on booking me a car. He told my daughter to rest, lifted the laundry basket with a flourish, kissed her forehead like a vow. Then his phone buzzed, and his face angled away. Casual, practiced. 2 minutes, he said, finger in the air like a conductor calling for quiet. The balcony door sighed shut. Outside, he smiled the smile he used for strangers who would become investors, not for wives who would become mothers. If you had asked me that night, I would have graded him an A-, with a note to improve on work-life boundaries. That's how the illusion worked. Never perfect, because perfect invites suspicion, but good enough to keep critique feeling ungrateful. We all collaborated. He cast, directed, charmed. We applauded, forgiven, excused. The show went on. And then the curtain ripped. My daughter on the floor, the ambulance's wail, the ICU's green glows, the map of the Pacific dotted blue, laughter lifting over luxury water, a woman's hand on his arm, what once looked like isolated quirks rearranged into a pattern so obvious it felt like a moral optical illusion snapping into focus. I replayed our history at her bedside, the way a detective rewalks a street after the crime, the proposal lights, the balcony calls, the policies that looked like helpfulness and felt like control, the generosity with a spotlight trained upon it, the line he delivered to me, I will take care of her, now curdled into something else. I will take custody of her life and make it look like a gift. The story of him had not been a love story. It had been an acquisition, the quiet purchase of a future he intended to own. I held my daughter's hand, the monitors counting out a rhythm for the new life inside her, and understood why the anger inside me had cooled into something metallic. Fire would only scorch. Precision would sever. He had built an empire out of angles and optics. He had taught me the currency he respected. I had already decided how to bankrupt him. It's strange how hindsight sharpens details that once seemed insignificant. Sitting in the sterile glow of the ICU, I began replaying the past like reels of old film, pausing at frames that never stood out before. Each memory rearranged itself into something more sinister. The little cracks had been there all along, but we'd painted over them, mistaking control for care, silence for peace, and lies for busyness. The first fissure I can truly name came during my daughter's 2nd trimester. Pregnancy had made her radiant, but also fragile in ways she wasn't used to admitting. She was used to carrying the weight of the world quietly. One evening, she confided in me, over tea, her hand brushing her belly with absent tenderness. "He's been traveling more," she said softly. I try not to complain. "He says it's all for us, for the baby." I remember tilting my head. "Does it feel like that to you? For you?" Her smile wavered. "I don't know. I think so." But her eyes flickered, betraying a different truth. Then came the weekends she spent alone, calling me to ask if I wanted to walk through farmers markets with her or browse baby clothes. "He's networking," she explained, always quick to defend him before anyone could form judgment. He hates it, but you know how business is. She never said it outright, but I heard the loneliness in her voice. The ache of preparing for motherhood while her husband built an empire elsewhere. There were other signs, small enough to dismiss if you wanted to. His phone, always face down on the table. The way he would smile at a message and then tuck the device away like a secret. The subtle shift in his scent, sometimes cologne she hadn't bought him, sometimes the faint tang of ocean air that had no place in a city still thawing from winter. I noticed the way she lingered with her hand on her belly whenever his absence grew longer. It was as though she drew strength not from him, but from the life inside her. She grounded herself with that touch, centering against a storm only she could feel brewing. I should have asked more, pushed harder, but when I did, she would shake her head and say, "He's distressed, Mom. He'll settle once the baby comes." Hope is a powerful anesthetic. Then there were the dinners I attended where his charm felt a shade too polished. He would laugh a beat too loud at jokes, steer conversations back to his achievements, drop the names of associates as though laying breadcrumbs for an audience. At first, it seemed like ambition. Later, I realized it was vanity cloaked in diligence. At one of those dinners, my daughter asked him a question about a client he had supposedly met on a trip. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice, then launched into a story so smooth it felt rehearsed. She smiled, but her eyes didn't linger on him the way they used to. She looked down at her plate instead, stirring the food she hadn't touched. Another crack appeared in the form of his policies. They weren't requests. Not really. They were framed as helpful suggestions, budgeting rules, dietary restrictions, schedules for her prenatal vitamins. At first, they sounded like care, like someone taking responsibility, but they accumulated into a ledger of control. Each note, another reminder that her choices were subtly being replaced by his. "Don't stress about work, I'll handle the finances," he'd say, slipping her credit card into his wallet with a smile. "No carbs after 6, it's better for both of you," he'd add, scribbling lists on the fridge. And she would nod, because resistance felt like conflict, and conflict wasn't what you wanted when you were pregnant, vulnerable, and in love with the man who promised you safety. I remember one particular night when I visited unexpectedly. He was away, another conference, and she was curled on the couch in his oversized hoodie, staring at her phone. She startled when she saw me, then smiled quickly, too quickly. I asked if she was all right. She laughed, brushing it off. "Pregnancy hormones," she said. "I cry at commercials now." But on the coffee table sat a photo frame, face down. I lifted it without asking. It was one of their engagement pictures, the kind people paid photographers to capture at golden hour. Her laugh was frozen mid-burst, his arms wrapped around her. When I looked at her, she whispered, "Sometimes it feels like that girl isn't me anymore." That was when I should have known the cracks weren't just surface flaws. They were structural. The final straw, though I didn't realize it until much later, came in the form of a voicemail. She had called me late at night, but by the time I saw it, she had already hung up. The message was short, muffled, her voice barely audible. "Mom, I don't know what's happening anymore. I feel alone." Then a pause and the sound of a door opening in the background before the message ended abruptly. I had called her back immediately, but she insisted everything was fine. "Just hormones," she said again, as though the word could explain away the cracks. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. And so we let the cracks stay hidden, covered them with plaster words like stress and work and hormones. We told ourselves the foundation was sound because admitting otherwise felt too dangerous, too painful. Now, as I sat in the ICU, watching machines breathe for her, I saw the truth with brutal clarity. Those cracks weren't warning signs. They were fractures in a dam that was always destined to break. And It had broken. I held her hand, remembering every dismissed instinct, every smoothed over worry. My grief simmered into guilt, but then hardened into resolve. He had left her to weather storms alone, had fed her illusions of stability while carving out a separate life of indulgence. He thought the cracks would stay hidden forever, but I would make sure they were the fault lines that swallowed him whole. The ICU had its own kind of rhythm, monitors beeping in steady succession, the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes, the whispered consultations at the foot of beds. It was a place where life balanced precariously, where every sound meant something, and where silence could suffocate. I sat beside my daughter's bed, her hand in mine, watching the thin line of her pulse dance across the monitor. She was stable, but fragile. Her breath, though assisted, was hers. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a tightening, an awareness that the story wasn't complete. Something wasn't adding up. The absence of her husband, his silence, his vanishing act, echoed louder with every passing hour. I told myself, maybe he hadn't heard yet. Maybe his phone was off, but the thought rang hollow. A man who loved her would have felt it, would have been here, desperate and terrified. I pulled out my phone, almost mechanically. A part of me already knew, though I didn't want to. My daughter had shown me once how to check his location. They had shared it during their honeymoon. Just for safety, she'd laughed. He likely forgot it's still linked. My thumb hovered over his name, dread coiling in my stomach. And then I pressed. The screen lit up, a map filled with blue pulsing dots. Not here. Not anywhere close. My breath caught when I zoomed in. His trail wasn't in the city. It wasn't in the state. It wasn't even on the mainland. His location pulsed from across the ocean. Hawaii. I blinked, trying to reconcile it. But when I tapped the latest update, the truth hit like ice water. A live photo opened, sound and movement included. He was on a yacht, the ocean behind him a dazzling blue. He held a champagne flute, sunlight catching on the glass. Laughter faintly spilled from the audio, carefree and cruel in its timing. And there, just behind him, leaning in with a smile too comfortable, was a woman. Her hand rested on his arm, her eyes gleaming with a freedom that mocked me. His mistress. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles whitened. The sterile air of the ICU felt suddenly acidic, burning in my lungs. I looked at my daughter, my only child, tethered to machines, fighting for her life, her unborn child's heartbeat monitored with urgent vigilance. And then I looked at the photo again. The contrast was unbearable. One world steeped in pain, the other in pleasure. He wasn't just absent. He was celebrating. Memories flickered in quick succession. The promises he made at their wedding, the way he cupped her face and whispered vows of protection, the countless times he framed himself as the steadfast provider. It had all been a performance, and now, in the glow of the ICU, the curtain had fallen, revealing the fraud for what he truly was. Grief swelled in me, raw and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to curse his name so loudly the walls themselves would shake. But none of that would heal my daughter. None of that would give her back the safety she deserved. So instead, I inhaled deeply and let the grief calcify into something sharper, something colder. Revenge. Not the wild, reckless revenge of broken glass or shouted confrontations. No, this would be different. Precise, calculated, clean. I remembered the day he first sat at our dinner table, the way he charmed me, polished his words like jewels. My daughter had looked at him with so much trust, so much hope. I wanted to believe he was worthy. I wanted to believe he'd shield her from pain, not become the architect of it. But the cracks had been there all along, hadn't they? The late-night calls he took outside, the sudden trips that grew longer, the fading of her smile, the way she'd hold her belly as if grounding herself against storms she couldn't name. I had seen it. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. And now here was the final proof. Undeniable and cruel, delivered in the ICU's sterile glow. My daughter tethered to wires while he toasted champagne under foreign skies with another woman. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I leaned closer to my daughter and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You don't need to worry anymore," I whispered. "I've got you." Then I pulled out my phone again, not to look at him, but to look at the details my daughter had given me years ago. She had always been cautious, my sweet girl, careful about safety nets. One of those nets had been financial. "Just in case," she had said with a laugh, adding my name to their joint accounts, the paperwork tucked neatly in folders she thought she'd never need. That case had arrived. I scrolled through banking apps, investment accounts, savings funds. His empire was built on money, on status, on possessions. That was his foundation. That was what I would dismantle. With every click, with every command, I could feel his world beginning to crumble. Cards would decline, accounts would freeze, yacht celebrations would sour. But it wouldn't end there. I dialed another number, one I hadn't used in years. My lawyer, a man who owed me more favors than I could count. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I gave him the facts, my voice steady, my words clipped. Pregnant daughter in ICU, husband absent with mistress, assets joint. I wanted emergency motions, separations, seizures, spousal support, all filed immediately. He didn't argue, he didn't hesitate. He knew better. By the time I hung up, the machine beside my daughter beeped in a steady rhythm. I squeezed her hand, a silent promise flowing through my grip. He thought he was untouchable, sipping champagne under the sun. But his downfall had already begun, and I would deliver it, not with fire, not with fury, but with precision. The ICU glowed around me, sterile, bright, unforgiving. My daughter's chest rose and fell with fragile determination. Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere far away, laughter echoed over waves. He had no idea his empire was already ash. The glow of the ICU monitors bathed my daughter's face in pale green light. I sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair, her hand still clutched tightly in mine, as though the force of my grip alone could tether her to this world. Outside the glass doors, nurses moved like shadows, their voices hushed, their steps quick. But in here, there was only the steady rhythm of machines and the fragile sound of her breathing. It was in that silence that my vow crystallized. I didn't scream, I didn't curse, I didn't let grief consume me. Grief would have left me powerless, hollowed out. Instead, I let the pain refine into something colder, sharper, precision. The kind of precision that could cut through a man's life without ever drawing blood. I opened my phone again, scrolling through the documents my daughter had signed years ago. She had been cautious, always more careful than she admitted. Just in case, she'd told me with a sheepish smile, handing me the paperwork that added my name to their joint accounts. At the time, I'd tucked the documents away, more comforted by her foresight than I could explain. Back then, just in case, had felt like an insurance policy against an unknown future. Tonight, that case had arrived. My fingers moved quickly, almost mechanically, though my heart beat with a steady, icy determination. One by one, I accessed their accounts, checking, savings, investments, credit. The numbers blinked back at me, his empire quantified in tidy figures. It was almost laughable how fragile it really was. A life built on money, appearances, and borrowed charm, all vulnerable to the tap of a screen. With a few commands, I froze everything. Checking, locked. Savings, inaccessible. Investment portfolios, sealed. The power he believed was limitless was now confined to digits in a void, unreachable, untouchable. I imagined him on that yacht, sipping champagne, his laugh loud and careless. I imagined an exact moment his card would decline, when the waiter, polite but firm, would return with the words, "I'm sorry, sir, it's been declined." I imagined the confusion flashing across his face, the arrogance turning to panic. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, my lawyer, a man who owed me favors I had never called in. Until now. The line connected, his groggy voice answering. I didn't waste time. "My daughter is in the ICU, I said, voice flat, steady. Her husband is in Hawaii with his mistress. I want everything in motion by morning. Emergency separation, asset seizure, spousal support hearings. I don't care if he fights it. He won't win." There was silence on the other end, then a cough, and his voice sharpened. Professional now. "Understood. I'll draft the filings immediately. You'll have motions ready to sign by sunrise. Good, I said. Make sure every door he tries to open slams shut. When I hung up, I exhaled for the first time in hours. Around me, the machines hummed, indifferent to the vow I had just made. My daughter stirred slightly, her fingers twitching against mine. I leaned closer. You don't have to know the details, sweetheart, but I promise you this. You'll never have to face him again. You'll never cry because of him again. I'll see to it. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. This wasn't about anger. It was about justice, about making sure that the man who abandoned her when she needed him most would never again have the power to wound her. Hours passed. The sky outside began to lighten, the faint gray of dawn bleeding through the hospital windows. I must have dozed for a moment, because the shrill buzz of my phone startled me awake. I answered without hesitation. His voice hit me like a whip. "What the hell did you do?" he barked, rage laced with panic. "My cards. Everything's frozen. You can't do this." I didn't flinch. I let him scream. Let the desperation in his voice stretch until it cracked. Then I spoke, calm, deliberate. "Your wife is in the ICU. Your child almost died tonight. And you were on a yacht with another woman. You don't get to scream at me. You don't get to call yourself a husband. Not anymore." There was silence on the line. Not the silence of defiance or arrogance, but a hollow silence, the kind a man makes when he realizes the control has slipped from his hands. I ended the call without another word. The vow had been made, and the first moves had already been played. His empire was collapsing, brick by brick, account by account. By the time he realized how thorough I had been, it would be too late. I turned back to my daughter, brushing her hair from her forehead, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. She was still here. That was all that mattered. But in the back of my mind, the vow repeated like a drumbeat. He will pay, not with blood, not with fire, but with ruin. Morning had a way of making the hospital feel crueler. The sun streamed through blinds that hadn't been opened, hinting at a normal world outside. A world where people sipped coffee, hurried to work, kissed their children goodbye. And here, though, the world remained suspended, tethered to machines, shadowed by uncertainty. My daughter's chest rose and fell beneath the wires and tubes, her fragile breaths keeping me rooted to the chair at her side. But while I sat with her, elsewhere, his empire was cracking. I imagined it clearly. The clink of champagne glasses still ringing in his ears, the confidence in his posture as he reached for his wallet. He would have handed over a black card, smirk poised, eyes daring anyone to doubt his success. And then the pause, the polite apology. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card's been declined." The first brick dislodged. He would have laughed it off, pulled another card, only to face the same result. Each swipe a deeper cut. The laughter around him would have faltered, eyes turning, whispers rising. His mistress's smile would have stiffened, confusion behind her practiced charm. The second brick fell. Somewhere between the yacht's deck and the marina, reality would have sunk its teeth in. His accounts, checking, savings, investments, all frozen. His safety nets pulled out from under him. By the time he returned to the resort, flustered and red-faced, the bank alerts would have swarmed his phone like vultures circling fresh carrion. And then came the third brick. While he scrambled, I was signing motions. My lawyer arrived at the hospital, briefcase in hand, files already prepared. Emergency separation papers, asset seizure filings, petitions for full spousal support, all stamped, notarized, legally binding. His empire wasn't just paused, it was being dismantled. Properties he thought untouchable were now tied up in courtrooms. Accounts he thought belonged to him were flagged for redistribution. The very ground he walked on was shifting, and he hadn't even realized the earthquake was mine. Hours later, the phone rang again. His voice, once polished and commanding, was cracked with panic. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is my money, my life. You don't understand what you've done." I let him burn himself out, the way a flame devours oxygen before sputtering to smoke. Then I answered, my tone calm, steady, unshakable. "No," I said. "You don't understand. Your wife almost died last night. Your child's life hung in the balance, and you weren't here. You were drinking champagne with another woman. You forfeited the right to call anything yours. There was silence again, heavy and hollow. It was the first time he'd ever been stripped of control. The first time silence belonged to me, not him. The cracks widened. By evening, news had spread. His yacht, financed under business accounts, was already under review. Payments he had deferred were suddenly due. Creditors circling with teeth bared. His mistress, realizing the golden life she thought she'd secured was slipping, distanced herself with remarkable speed. By the time the sun set, she was gone, her laughter no longer cushioning his fall. And still, he fought. He called friends, contacts, associates, begging for loans, for extensions, for favors. But influence evaporates quickly when people smell ruin. The same men who toasted him last week avoided his calls today. Doors that once opened easily now slammed shut. His empire, so carefully constructed, had never been built on loyalty, only on illusions. I sat by my daughter's bed as it all unfolded, my phone buzzing occasionally with updates from my lawyer. Each message was another nail in the coffin of the life he thought he controlled. One read, "Accounts officially frozen. Motions filed. Hearing set within 72 hours. Another, yacht repossession order in progress. And finally, court favors leaning towards spousal support. He has no defense." I read them silently, my face betraying nothing. My daughter stirred slightly in her bed, eyes fluttering open for the briefest moment. She looked at me, weak but alive, and whispered one word, "Mom." I leaned closer, brushing her hair back gently. "I'm here, sweetheart. Rest now. You're safe." She didn't know what I had done. Not yet. She didn't need to. All she needed to feel was safety, to know she wasn't alone, to believe that the world outside the ICU hadn't completely crumbled. But for him, it had. I pictured him pacing in a hotel room, phone pressed to his ear, voice growing hoarse as he demanded explanations that never came. Each call would end the same. Apologies laced with distance, reassurances that meant nothing. He would look in the mirror, see the sweat on his forehead, the panic in his eyes, and wonder how it all slipped away so fast. That was the beauty of precision. You don't strike all at once. You dismantle, piece by piece, brick by brick, until a man stands surrounded by rubble and realizes there is nothing left to hold on to. By the end of the night, his empire wasn't just faltering, it was collapsing. And the best part? He hadn't even seen the full weight of what was coming. I sat back in the stiff chair, my daughter's hands still in mine, and let myself breathe. For the first time in days, I exhaled fully. The machines beeped steadily beside me, her heartbeat strong, her breaths even. Hope pulsed faintly in the room, but in the distance, far away, another sound echoed. The sound of walls falling, of illusion shattering, of a man finally learning the cost of betrayal. And I knew then this was only the beginning. By evening, news had spread. His yacht, financed under business accounts, was already under review. Payments he had deferred were suddenly due, creditors circling with teeth bared. His mistress, realizing the golden life she thought she'd secured was slipping, distanced her. The hospital at night was a world of shadows. Hallways echoed with the hum of machines, the occasional rattle of a gurney, the low murmur of voices that carried both urgency and exhaustion. I stayed at my daughter's bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, my fingers laced with hers. Her face looked calmer now, her body steadier, the storm inside her slowly subsiding. That calm anchored me, because beyond these walls, another storm raged. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a number I knew too well, his number. I stared at it for a long second, then swiped to answer. His voice exploded through the receiver. "What the hell did you do?" It was raw, frantic, tinged with the panic he could no longer disguise. "My cards are frozen. The accounts, everything is locked down. Do you have any idea?" I didn't interrupt. I let him rant, let his words stumble over themselves, his rage spiraling into desperation. There was something intoxicating in hearing the man who always controlled the room lose his grip. He shouted about money, about rights, about how I had no authority. He demanded I undo it all, threatened lawyers, threatened me. And still, I stayed silent. It wasn't until his breath grew ragged, until the fury turned into something brittle, that I finally spoke. My words cut through his chaos like ice. "Your wife is in the ICU. Your child almost died last night, and you were in Hawaii, on a yacht with another woman." The line went dead silent. Not the silence of arrogance, not the silence of someone preparing a counterstrike. This was different. This was the silence of a man realizing he had been stripped bare. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You don't get to scream at me. You don't get to call yourself a husband. Not anymore. I could hear his breathing. Uneven, shallow, like a man drowning in his own fear. For years, he had controlled every conversation, every narrative, spinning lies with the ease of a salesman. But now, for the first time, there was nothing he could say. He couldn't charm his way out, couldn't laugh it off, couldn't redirect the spotlight. The silence on his end was the first silence he couldn't command. I let it stretch, savoring the weight of it.
You built your life on lies, I said softly, and now you'll watch as every one of them crumbles. You'll have nothing left, not the yacht, not the money, not even the illusion of being a good man. All you'll have is the knowledge that you lost everything because you betrayed the one person who trusted you most. He tried to speak then, stammering, but the words collapsed before they formed. I didn't give him the chance to recover. You should know something, I continued. This isn't anger. This isn't vengeance for vengeance sake. This is precision, and I am very, very precise. Then I hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. I had expected to feel triumph, or maybe lingering fury. Instead, I felt clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop questioning yourself, when instinct and action align. I turned back to my daughter. Her eyelids fluttered as if she might wake, her fingers twitching faintly in mine. I leaned closer, my voice soft again. You don't need to worry anymore, sweetheart. I promise you, you're safe now. The machines beeped, steady and sure, like an orchestra keeping tempo with her fragile recovery. And somewhere far away, a man sat in silence, realizing his kingdom was already ash. That silence was mine now. It didn't surprise me when he finally showed up. Men like him always did. They could run, they could hide, they could shout through phone calls and send threats through lawyers. But in the end, desperation always drove them to the very door they once thought beneath them. It was a week after that first phone call. My daughter was still in the hospital, weak but recovering. The baby's heartbeat had steadied, the doctors cautiously optimistic. Every day I sat by her bed, feeding her spoonfuls of broth, brushing her hair back, whispering reassurances. I hadn't told her the details yet. I would wait until her body was strong enough, until her mind could bear the weight. For now, all she needed was hope. That evening, I returned home for the first time in days. The house was dim, the quiet unfamiliar after nights of beeping machines. I had just set my bag down when a pounding rattled the door. It wasn't polite, it wasn't controlled, it was frantic, the kind of knocking that carries both fury and fear. I opened it to find him standing there. He looked nothing like the polished man I once knew. His hair was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. The tan he'd acquired on that yacht had faded into a sickly pallor, his confidence stripped away. He didn't look like a husband or a provider or the charming man who once promised my daughter the world. He looked like a man cornered. "You can't do this to me." He spat the words before I even had the chance to greet him. His voice cracked with desperation. "You can't just take everything from me. This is my life." I studied him for a long moment, then stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind me so my daughter's home wouldn't be tainted by his presence. My voice was calm, measured, steady as ever. "Your life," I repeated. "It stopped being your life the moment you chose betrayal over family. All I did was show you the cost." His eyes darted, wild, searching for a foothold, for some angle of control. He tried to soften his voice, to play the role of the misunderstood husband. "I made mistakes, okay? People make mistakes, but freezing my accounts, taking my yacht, dragging my name through court, that's not justice, it's cruelty." "Cruelty," I said, my jaw tightening, "is leaving your pregnant wife to bleed on the floor while you toast champagne with your mistress. Cruelty is letting her think she wasn't enough while you built another life on lies. What I did wasn't cruel.
It was fair. His face twisted, rage flaring again. You'll ruin me. Do you understand? I have nothing left. No money, no friends, no business, nothing. You've destroyed me. I stepped closer, meeting his eyes so he couldn't look away. No, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't hide it anymore. For the first time, he faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. A man realizing the armor he wore was nothing more than paper. He tried one last angle, his voice breaking. Please, just stop. I'll fix it. I'll be better. I'll come back to her. Just give me another chance.
The plea might have worked on someone else. It might have worked on my daughter once too, back when hope blinded her to the cracks. But not anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what she'd endured. You won't be coming back to her, I said flatly. Not now, not ever. She doesn't need you. She never did. And now she's safe from you. He stared at me, his jaw trembling, but there was nothing left for him to say. Every door he once walked through so easily had been sealed shut. Every account, every asset, every ally had slipped away. He was cornered, powerless, exactly where he belonged. I turned and walked back into the house, closing the door firmly behind me. His voice rose once more, muffled through the wood, alternating between begging and threats, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His words no longer carried power here. When I returned to the hospital later that night, my daughter stirred as I sat beside her. Her eyes opened weakly, her lips forming a faint smile. Mom, you're here. I'll always be here, I whispered back, brushing her hair gently. She closed her eyes again, drifting into sleep, her breathing steady, her child safe. And I realized something then. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was finished. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't always come with fire or fury. Sometimes it came quietly, delivered with precision, and precision was exactly what I had given him. The beeping of the monitors had become a strange kind of lullaby. Each sound, once terrifying, now reassured me. Steady, rhythmic. Proof that my daughter was still here, still fighting, still alive. A week had passed since that night when I had found her crumpled on the floor. A week since the ambulance lights blurred the world into chaos. And in that week, I had watched her slowly claw her way back toward life. She was stronger now, still pale, still weak, but her eyes opened more often. Her voice whispered words instead of silence. Her smile flickered faintly when I sat beside her. The doctors said the baby was holding on too, fragile but resilient. Each day carried us a step further away from the edge. On the morning of her first real smile, I knew the war was over. She looked at me, eyes brimming, and whispered, "He hasn't come, has he?" I hesitated. For a moment, I thought about telling her the truth. The yacht, the mistress, the ruin I had unleashed with the precision of a scalpel. But she didn't need all that right now. She didn't need to carry his betrayal like another wound. No, I said softly. He won't be coming. Not now, not ever. Her lips trembled, and then she smiled. Faint but real. Relief washed over her face, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her chest. She reached for my hand, squeezing weakly. "Thank you," she whispered. That was enough. Later that week, as she slept peacefully for the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The storm had passed, but its wreckage remained. I thought of him, disheveled, furious, powerless, standing on my doorstep, spitting threats and pleas in the same breath. He had once strutted through life like a man untouchable, convinced his charm was armor and his wealth was a fortress. Now he was nothing. The yacht repossessed, his accounts frozen, his name dragged through courtrooms he once thought he owned, his mistress gone, his allies vanished, his empire reduced to rubble. And it hadn't taken violence or chaos to dismantle him, just precision, quiet, deliberate, methodical precision. I had learned something in this battle. Betrayal doesn't always require fire to be answered. Sometimes the sharpest justice is delivered without noise, without rage, without spectacle. Sometimes justice is a scalpel,
not a sword. When I walked into my daughter's hospital room that evening, she stirred and looked at me with tired but trusting eyes. I sat beside her, stroking her hair as she drifted back to sleep, the steady hum of the machines filling the silence. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully, a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't angry. I was finished. Justice had been delivered, clean, undeniable, unshakable. He would live with the knowledge that the empire he tried to build collapsed because he underestimated the strength of a mother's silence. And my daughter, my only child, would raise her child free of his poison, free of his lies, free of the shadows he cast. As I sat there, the monitors keeping time with her breathing, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace.
And that's how betrayal was met. Not with screams, not with violence, but with precision. A mother's vow turned into justice, and a man who thought he owned everything was left with nothing. If this story gripped you, make sure to hit like, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who believes that karma always arrives, silently but surely.